line of people who have their backs to you, that's where the steps end, your rights end, essentially. They had one or two protesters run up. One person started doing yoga, of all things, on the steps of the Supreme Court, and then you had about 200 protesters rush up. And now it is kind of in the hands of the police in terms of how far they want to press this. All day we've seen this back and forth between protesters, all week really, in terms of who wants to get arrested, who doesn't want to get arrested. I'm going to step out again so you can kind of see some of the signs and what's going on up there. There's all sorts of chants coming up. Whose court, our court, whose streets, our streets, Black Lives Matter, etc., etc. But now it's up to the police. Are they willing to walk up there and tell people either you leave or you get arrested or not? So far, at least from what we can see, is they don't have the numbers of police officers out here to clear the steps, even if they wanted to. When the Capitol Police were prepared before the vote to confirm now Justice Kavanaugh, they had dozens, if not hundreds, of Capitol Police officers out here, massive reinforcements, and clearly had a plan. They basically said to the protesters, look, you can either go to the left and get arrested, you can go to the right and leave, but now's your time to decide. It doesn't seem like they have those numbers of police officers here to make that call with these protesters. And I can't really see any reinforcements arriving, Chris. So now comes the question, are they willing to just sort of allow these folks to continue to chant who know that Brett Kavanaugh is inside getting ready to be sworn in? Or do they decide that they're going to actually bring out reinforcements and clear the steps to the way that they typically keep order here at the court? Yet to be determined, Chris.
But Leland, just to make the point, while it's a very loud protest and an unusual protest, all the way up the steps of the front of the Supreme Court. There's no violence. There's no action, any law breaking, other than the fact that they're where they shouldn't be.
No, not only isn't there any violence, it's a fairly tame crowd. You covered a lot of protests in Washington. I've certainly been out in a lot of different protests in different areas. This is about as tame and friendly of a protest as you get. And it's worth noting that the numbers here have dropped easily by a quarter, if not more. Starting at about 11 a.m., the numbers have continued to go down. This is the last of the really die-hard crowd. And as we've talked about throughout the day, a lot of the folks who are at least standing around out here that we've talked to, maybe not those up on the steps, are spectators. You talk to people, I came in from Florida, one group told me, I was in from Indiana, we were just here on vacation, I brought my kids by to see what this looks like. Some of them are for, some of them are against, but clearly not really part of the core group here. So the amount of attention focused on those folks compared to their numbers could certainly be a little disproportional, Chris.
Leland Vittert, in all of the action on the front steps of the Supreme Court. Leland, thank you. So, Brett Kavanaugh has been confirmed by the Senate 50-48, but what does Justice Brett Kavanaugh mean for the makeup of the Supreme Court?
We're going to hear from the Wall Street Journal's Kimberly Strassel on that straight ahead.
That are going to be about judicial restraint, but also pushing back against that bureaucratic state. That changes the entire operating procedure that the left has depended on for a long time in terms of their governance. And that's why you saw the fight roll the way it did.
Yeah, and not to get too wonky, but this whole idea of this Chevron defense, this case that says from ages ago that you should give deference to agencies, federal agencies, when they make decisions, it looks like it's something that possibly with a Justice Kavanaugh on the court is something that really might change. So it's really going to clip the wings of some of those federal agencies should they get the right case teed up and he goes where we think he might on that.
And that's going to be the day-to-day decisions that you see coming out of a Supreme Court with Judge Kavanaugh on it. There was so much debate about Roe v. Wade, all of these big singular decisions and questions. It's going to be much more those wonky things, Shannon, like you say, that matter. They're going to have huge significance because, as many of us have felt, that bureaucratic state has really become this engine of regulation and it decides so many decisions we have. So that restraint is going to be a big change, but it's not going to be on some of those huge decisions that everyone's focused on so much.
He's talked, too, about the issue of that you shouldn't look for vagueness where it doesn't exist. There's a lot said, obviously, about following the law versus interpreting or looking to too many extraneous sources in coming up with this. And he's taught law, obviously, for years, actually hired by then Dean of Harvard Law, now Justice Kagan. She had great respect for his work as well as a scholar and intellect. And he's talked about the fact that you don't go looking for a lack of clarity where it isn't there. I mean, how do you think that potentially could shift this court as well?
Well, you know, I thought it was very clarifying listening to Senator Collins and that amazing speech that she gave, because she walked through these questions and pointed out what a careful jurist Brett Kavanaugh actually is. This is not a guy who is a radical, as people were seeking to portray him throughout this entire event. On all these questions, again, very wonky on severability. Do you strike down a whole law or just a portion of it? Things like that. He has always been a very cautious judge, and people have talked too before about how you look back at his opinions, those that he authored and those that he joined, 90-some% of the time he was in the same camp as Merrick Garland, the former justice the justice that Barack Obama wanted on the court. So again, this is going to be more about incrementalism. Every case that the Supreme Court does matters, obviously, because so few of them go, but those are going to be the ones that matter.
All right, Kimberly Strassel, thank you very much for joining us, and we've got much more right after this break.